All right, well, I think let's get started. Just 1 second here. We've got a few people still coming in. All right, well, I'm going to get it kicked off, and we're just going to do a little bit of an opening welcome. And while some people are still checking in and getting set up, happy Friday, everybody. It's so great to see so many people here on this call. It's really exciting and wonderful to have so many people who are interested in the topic of discussion today, which is performing arts information representation for a changing field. This is just a regular Zoom meeting, so you'll see that you can mute or unmute yourself, so please stay muted. I'm going to go over a little bit of housekeeping in just a minute, but I do want to introduce quickly who we have on the call today. We're joined by, well, myself. My name is Mariel Marshall. I'm an artist and a core member of the immersive performance company Bluemouth Inc. I'm also the founder of StagePage, an intelligence company working to connect audiences with live performance by building matching and personalization tools. We also have Sarah Bay-Cheng with us. She's an artist, researcher, dean of the School of Arts, Media, Performance, and Design at York University. And we have Daniela Rosu with us, who's a postdoctoral research fellow at U of T, computer scientist who specializes in the application of knowledge, representation, and reasoning techniques to diverse disciplines, including the performing arts. That's just a quick introduction to all of us. Once we're all going to have a chance to talk, so you'll get to know us a little bit more, and we can all take a bit of a moment to go a little bit more into who we are and our background as we go. And I do see still that people are joining us, continuing to join us. We have almost over 50 people, so I think they'll be trickling in probably over the next couple of minutes, but we do have a lot to get through, so we're going to just get going right away. So again, thank you for joining us and being here today. So you'll be able to see the screen share here, and you can toggle between the speakers. It's not a webinar. This is a regular Zoom meeting, and as we are coming together today, I did want to take a moment. We're bringing together artists nationally, and I wanted to acknowledge that I'm streaming from the traditional territory of Takaranto, where the trees meet the water, the gathering place of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat nations. If you are coming from another place, please feel free to name the land or the territory where you are you can add it in the group chat. And I'll give us a moment to do that. And as you take a moment to add it to the chat, this is in the screen share here, a map of Turtle Island called nativeland.ca. And what I really like about this map is that it makes visible the territories, the languages, the treaties across the continent. And you can actually toggle between the language or the treaties, and it's quite a beautiful map to take a look at and explore. Now, I also recognize that naming is not enough, action is important. And as we come together today, I ask us all to consider how even a discussion about information and representation can play a role in dismantling oppressive and racist systems of power. Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, and we all have to do the work to change the systems of white supremacy that we function in and are a part of. So I wanted to really start off with that because I think it's an important thing to bring through all of this discussion, or even to continue thinking about it or asking those questions as we go. It's how can we make change, or how can we make actions that dismantle and create change? So let's begin. Housekeeping. So in good Zoom fashion, let's stay muted while others are speaking, because again, we have quite a few people on the call. And if you have a question, feel free to write it in the chat and we'll try to address them as we go. And if we use anything unfamiliar terms or jargon, please also list it in the chat and we'll work to clarify it. And the first chunk of the meeting is being recorded. So, and then once we get to the discussion section at the end, we'll turn off the recording and that won't be shared. So people are free to openly talk or share your opinions and feedback. And also there are live captions happening of the event. So you should be able to see in the top left corner of Zoom that there's a live link to otter.ai, and that should give you a live transcription of the event. And thanks to Jessa Agila at Arts Pond for that idea in order to do the live captions. I think it's a great tool that we can use. And also to Margaret Lamb, who's on the call today. Thanks, Margaret. She's offered to do a write-up of today's session to be shared with the wider community. So just a little bit of framing for this as we dive in. So what are our we've got two main objectives for what this call is really about. The first one is to raise awareness about the importance of how artists share information about their work online, information representation. And this is from increasing the discoverability about our online work to being able to build tools to measure impact. So it's really about raising awareness. And then secondly, we want to gather feedback from you about what your needs are as artists, researchers, and stakeholders when you're sharing information about your work. Now, this is the beginning of a discussion. I don't think we'll be able to ask you all of the questions and get all of the feedback, but I do want to say I'm available and accessible. So please feel free to get in touch with me afterwards or reach out if you haven't had a chance to share all of your thoughts or opinions. We're also going to be letting you know about a way to get involved, a community group that will be continuing the discussion as we move forward. So there will be more opportunities. So if you don't get a chance in this hour, then don't worry, there will be more chances down the road. Okay. And what I really want to say too is that together, I think this is really about coming together and building a community that can advocate and develop for the representation of our work in the performing arts. Because together we can work to make change, whether it's, advocating for technology companies to change the way they're doing things, or to start building tools ourselves within the community for us to work together and make change for the future. So why are we here? And this, again, I really want to say it's an entry point to this topic, and it's not necessarily about getting all of the answers. It's about opening up the discussion and really starting to take a look in at on our agenda. We have what is at stake for the performing arts community? What is information representation and how does it impact us as artists? How can we come together to shape a better future for performing arts? And then again, as I said, we're going to have a bit of an open discussion at the end. So we're now going to hear, that's enough for me for now, we're going to hear from the incredible Sarah Bay-Cheng, who is with us. She's literally written the book on the subject matter, Taxonomies for a Changing Field. Her artistic work spans disciplines from interactive technology-driven gameplay through museums with a piece called Play, Share, Beyond, In, to she just translated mashups of classic texts that challenge audiences to consider implications of interactivity or passivity. And that was an awesome piece with robots, green screens, Nerf guns called Woi Ubu, Watch or Play. She's now the Dean of the School of the Arts, Media, Performance, and Design at York University, and I am so honored to have her with us to talk about framing and really what's at stake for the performing arts sector. So take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Mariel, and thank you all for being here. Mariel is one of my favorite alumni from York University, but of course, one of the great pleasures has been learning and about what all of our alumni are doing and meeting them. And I know some of them are here today, and so I'm really grateful to all of you. I'm also grateful to everybody for showing up, because frankly, I think in this context, anytime anybody shows up for an optional Zoom event, I think is a great, act of generosity and collaboration. So thank you all very much for being here. I'm a little bit like, the resident humanities nerd. So I'll kind of approach it from that angle. And just start with a quick anecdote. Before everything kind of shut down, I had the opportunity to attend a working group on digital technologies in theater and performance history and historiography in Bern, Switzerland. And it was a really amazing international group, a lot of German-speaking countries represented, and European archivists, artists, technologists, and teachers, educators. And we got into kind of wonderful conversations around, different kind of taxonomies and ontologies and all of this kind of stuff. But one of my favorite discussions was On one of the last afternoons, I think it was like the third afternoon of a 3-day meeting, we got into what in my mind is about an hour and a half, 2-hour conversation about the difference between actor and performer. Now, if you're like me and you come at this from a theater background or performance art or anything like that, we all have some fairly nuanced ideas of what constitutes an actor versus a performer, but they're more or less, I think, for many of us, equivalent or similar. And in this context, it became an extended philosophical, but also ontological discussion about what are the differences between those two words and those two ideas. And it really brings home the notion of what this project is in many ways about, which is in some ways an active translation. Can I go to the next slide, please? So really what we're talking about here, for me at least, is a question of language. And so I use the word translation in a very deliberate way, which is how do we translate the way we describe events, shows, productions, performances, theaters, etc., in human language, and with all of the kind of nuance and detail, and even idiosyncrasies in that discussion, into machine language, which is much more rigid, much more defined, and where the distinction between an actor and a performer becomes incredibly important, but can also become the difference between something getting recognized and something becoming completely invisible, particularly in a digital sphere. I've been working in digital performance and theater history and performance history for almost 20 years now. And for a long time, I was really kind of a niche outlier in theater and performance studies. And so I feel like, in this moment, I finally kind of come into my own, right? Which is that all of a sudden we are now all doing digital performance, that acting for the camera is now part of, how we communicate. And I think that this has some real advantages, as well as presenting some real challenges. And I think these challenges kind of map onto these 5 categories here. So I'll just kind of outline them quickly and then kind of move on with how we're addressing some of these. The first is really an issue of curation. And this means different things to different people and different fields, but essentially is how we navigate the ever increasing array of online information related to performing arts. So whether that's current shows, recent shows, criticism, things that are available online, information about offline performances that are circulating through online information networks. All of this is happening. And of course, increasingly, this concept of curation is used as a way of describing how information reaches users and audiences, whether that's deliberate and things that are carefully constructed, like RSS feeds and things like that, or completely incidental and driven by algorithms that we don't have access to and may not even completely understand why we're getting certain information highlighted to us and not others. The second is criticism, which is how we respond to the available information and work that is being produced. So how we find it, how we understand it, but then also how we comment on it. And one of the really exciting things about this current moment also is that criticism and the access of criticism has become incredibly equalized. And of course, this started with blogs and microblogs, but it certainly continues now, and which voices get recognized, how those voices are recognized, and also how they're valued in the kind of online digital marketplace becomes an incredibly important way of thinking about these things as well. And now we'll sort of veer into the nerd territory, which is the history and archives of how we understand it. So as a theater historian, most of the work that I've done over the course of my studies and my career has been in material culture and often paper. So linguistic and textual representations of performances that I never got to see. Sometimes there were photographs. If I was very, very lucky, and we're talking about things in the late 19th, but mostly in the 20th century, perhaps there was film. But there's been a lot of discussion around the distortions of video and film reproductions and what that means. What we have now in this current moment is a completely new approach to building those archives and understanding how they function as historical records of the current moment that we're in. And again, how those get interpreted, understood, recorded, and then also analyzed and disseminated in the digital domain becomes incredibly important for how we understand the work that's being produced and how future scholars and historians will understand it as well. I won't say very much about theory, except to say that how we look at things and how we understand them is always shaped by the tools that we use. And so I'm always mindful of making sure and thinking about the role of artists in not just documenting work, but also understanding how the processes of documentation, dissemination, analysis, and recall happen, and what that does to the way we understand the work that we produce, and also how it influences the theories that underlie future production. And then finally, I wouldn't be anything if I didn't say something about education, and that I think these tools are incredibly essential for us as we seek to train, educate, and empower new generations of artists and emerging artists, and young people, and how we build these ideas into our current curricula, how we work, and what are the educational opportunities that projects like this afford us. So really, I think if we kind of think about the project, at least from my perspective, it's really about kind of bringing all of these things into focus and how we can understand and help record and document and also translate what we're doing in the performing arts into these new digital recording techniques as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That's if you haven't had a chance to read her book, it's really fascinating in order to look at it, just the different concepts about how we can start framing or rethinking about a lot of these ideas. So I do recommend it. Now, a few of the things you said, Sarah, like you've outlined a few different like core areas, and what I thought it would be interesting to do would be to take a dive into, to go through a few quick examples of what it actually means for me when I'm thinking about being an artist, making work, and then how do I share that work online, just so that we're all on the same page about a couple of examples of what we mean. So now it's important to note that there's two sides here, right? There's me as an artist and creator of the content. And then on the other side is the audience who's looking to necessarily discover content. In this example, there's lots of different examples, but let's just say here, artist one side, audience on the other. And what's in between it is the technology, right? I want my show to appear in, for example, digital archives so that 50 years from now, people can find my work. I want it to be discovered right now by audiences through online search. I want it to get recommended to people using different tools or algorithms that exist. So again, there's this relationship between between content and creator and technologies in the middle. So what do we mean when we're really talking about information representation? We've used this word a lot. It's the title of today's discussion. So what we're talking about here is most of what we see online, on the web, it's content that's presented for humans. It's suitable for human consumption. We go to a website. It's not meant to be consumed by a software program. It's meant to be consumed by me or you. You read the content. You see the show. My upcoming show. It's happening on this day. At this time. It'll cost me this much. I then decide whether or not I want to buy a ticket. And this is the most common way that we use the web, right? It's pretty no-brainer. It's information retrieval. But what's happening very quickly, the web's becoming a place where it's not just for humans, it's for algorithms that can do the processing automatically for us. They read, they process the web page, and they feed it back to us, to an application, to Siri. There's lots of different options. But this is really this future change that is very, very quickly happening. So when I'm talking about information representation, we're specifically talking here about, this is why this GIF is a brain to a computer, about how we convey meaning and relationship about specific things to a computer, to a machine, so that a software program can understand the words, the concepts, in the same way that you or I understand the words and concepts. So I wanted to go through a quick example here of a recent show that I worked on with Bluemouth Inc. Just, I'm familiar with it. I thought, let's just go through what it looks like if I wanted to, um, you know, make this show, use the information about the show to see what's possible. So Cafe Sarajevo is an interdisciplinary, it's a contemporary piece by Bluemouth Inc. We had the chance to do it right before the pandemic happened, so it holds a special place in my heart as the last sort of piece of work that I got to present to audiences before we locked down. Now, the reason I use this too is because it's a contemporary piece. There was gameplay, audiences became participants in the show, they take on roles, they help us tell the story. There's a headset with VR and radio frequency headphones. So it wasn't a black box piece of theater with, you know, with a fourth wall and an audience divide. It's a contemporary piece in a lot of different ways. And wow, I just realized what I said there. I don't mean to say that a black box piece can't be a contemporary, but I mean that there's lots of different types of work that is being made outside of what we know as, or what many people come to know as theater, right? So I feel like I've just dug myself a little bit of a hole there and I got to dig myself back out. But let's just use this example to try to go through increasing discoverability of the show by sharing information about it online. So for example, I may want to increase the discoverability by having it recommended to people. For example, in Google's event experience recommender, you've probably seen it. If you're able to see the screen share here, this is the event experience recommender by Google. You could see the categories are on the left, and then information about the shows appear on the right. And here I'm in the category called shows, where you can see bridal shows, children's shows, trade shows, they're all sort of being lumped together. So if I wanted to get my show to appear, Cafe Sarajevo to appear in this recommender, what would I need to do with my information? How would I need to represent that information? So Google uses, they require that we structure the data in a very specific way. And I can do this using a third-party website like Facebook or Eventbrite, or I could do it myself. Maybe I don't want, you know, that URL link from the card. If you, can I point to it? Yeah, so maybe I don't want that to go to Facebook. I want it to go to Bluemouth's website to point people there. So I could either add it myself using Google's data highlighter. I could use a tool such as a WordPress plugin or a proprietary tool, or I could code it myself. So this is not a workshop or this is not a discussion about coding, but I just want to briefly just show you a little bit what that looks like so we get an idea of what's under the hood of how this information is being structured and processed. So in order to structure it the way that Google would want, I need to use terminology that Google has developed, and this is called schema.org. And schema.org, they do schemas for all sorts of things on the internet, where they define what different things are, events, books, creative content, people, places, you name it. And if we want to take a quick look at event, which is the idea that we have to use for a show, if we take a look, you can even see the description here, an event. How does schema.org define an event? Well, they define an event as an event, which is maybe useful for you or I, because we understand what an event is. But again, keep in mind, how does a computer or a machine understand or process that? And then if we get into the details of it, again, you don't have to, I'm not proposing that everyone learns how to code, but I do think it's important to sort of just take a quick peek at what's underneath it. So on the left here, if you take a look, you can see I've coded using JSON LD, which is the method of encoding that they want. And then on the right, you can just see the output of this. And again, you can use a tool, you can code it yourself if you want. But the reason for showing you this is again, not the code, but if we look at the way that the event information is being structured, this is what I want to talk about. So for example, we've already talked a little bit about event, but now what's the type of event? I'm forced to choose between a couple of different options. the closest option that I thought was a fit would be theater event. We don't call what we do necessarily theater, but it's a close enough fit. And then if I'm looking at things like, say I wanted to define the roles of who's in the performance, who's on my creative team. They have things like performer, they have things like actor, but there's missing concepts around stage manager, choreographer. Number of different roles don't exist. If I want to, for example, if I wanted to mark up or I wanted to describe the information around the accessibility of the performance, that doesn't exist. It's not a possibility. You know, things like relaxed performance or ASL interpretation or even the venue. These concepts just don't exist. So it's not possible to add them to the information about my show in a way that Google can understand or other machines. So, and there's a number of missing concepts. I could go on, you know, audience interactivity type, the premiere type, you know, there's a show program. So the list goes on. So I just wanted to draw attention to some of those concerns that I have around this tool. That's not to say it's not also amazing, because you know, the tools like this are being built and are going to improve discoverability. And if I follow all of the ways that Google wants us to do it, I will be able to get my show into their recommender, and that's a great starting place. But again, keep in mind that they're going to lump me together with that bridal show and the industry trade shows all in the same place. So we're doing everything we can in this case to follow the rules of Google's guidelines for how they want our event information structured. But there are obviously some challenges. And so Google needs to hear from us. Schema.org needs to hear from us. And by us, I mean the performing arts community, not just, we, you know, together as artists, as creators, as organizations, we can come together and we can actually influence these tools. And I'm talking about Google, but there's so many possibilities. You know, there's not just Google, it's Facebook, it's Bing, there are small tools being built across the country right now that are similarly recommenders or search or applications. So this is just one example of many. And then if we put discoverability aside for a second and take a quick peek at, okay, now I've gotten my show discovered on the recommender and in search, and now I want it to be found 50 years from now in archives. So I'm, for example, going to use Wikidata, which is the underlying structure for Wikipedia. Now, again, here we're seeing I'm being asked to use a different type of vocabulary in order to structure my data within Wikidata's system. And again, this isn't about necessarily learning how to do it. This is just, I want to show an example of some of the challenges and opportunities as well that exist for us in terms of information representation. So this is Wikidata. It asked me to make statements about the work, right? So I can say, Café Sarajevo is an instance of a play. Okay, well, it's not really a play. A play refers to, in this case, literature. I would maybe say it's interdisciplinary performance, or I could maybe choose something else. Or if it doesn't exist, I could create it. So there are some challenges around the model that exists, but there's also lots of possibilities, because Wikidata is really free and open for anyone to contribute to, which is awesome, right? It's awesome for us, but it also means that if everyone extends Wikidata and we can't agree on some concepts, we can't agree on what an event is, we can't agree on what a performance is. If everyone in this call right now went to Wikidata and you defined your own idea of performance or your own idea of performer, then it would be awesome. We'd have 50 different descriptions of it, but this would make it unusable, right, for an application or a software tool to actually process, or to be used for 50 years down the road when someone's trying to parse that information together into some semblance that makes sense. So I just wanted, before I pass the baton over to Daniela Rosu, I do want to say that there are some amazing initiatives that are already existing across the country. We've got Capicoa's Link Digital Future. They're working on terminology, they're doing workshops, outreach, advocacy. We've got Culture Creates, who's actually building a tool that's helping arts organizations structure their data. and then feed it into a national knowledge graph, which is really exciting. I've been working on a recommender system, and I believe we also have Dan Webster on the call today, who's working on an event listing site as well as a streaming platform in order to make events available on the same location. So there are people who are already working on with existing terminologies or building new terminologies and working on side projects related to this field. So we're not starting from the ground up. It's really about supporting these initiatives, and how do we make artists the center of this work? How can we put artists into a place where they're the ones defining the terms, defining the way that we represent our work, and allowing technologies to learn from us, as opposed to the other way around, scrambling to try to get technologies to make sense or to fit our work into what they've defined. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Daniela Rosu, who is a computer scientist. She works in the realm of artificial intelligence. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Toronto, and her research interests are in the application of knowledge representation and reasoning techniques to diverse disciplines, including the performing arts. And she's going to walk us through her approach to working with domain experts, including artists, and how to translate that work into standards that can be used by software developers and applications. So take it away, Daniela.
Thank you, Mariel. If you, I think it's better if you actually take control of the presentation.
Sure.
Because in the interest of having the discussion afterwards, I'm going to try and keep this very, very short. So thank you for the amazing introduction. Indeed, I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Toronto. I'm a computer scientist. My work focuses on applications of artificial intelligence to decision support systems. I use everything from deductive reasoning techniques to statistical learning and I've been doing this for a number of years for various domains, anything from medicine to social sciences, and now with the help of Mariel and Sarah, I'm trying to expand my my reach to the performing arts sector. I think both Sarah and Mariel made an amazing case for why the performing arts community should get involved in designing. And I just realized that you actually don't see the latest. Did you download the presentation by any chance?
When did you change it?
I did add something on this particular slide.
This one?
I'm not sure. Yeah, no, never mind. It's just for some reason it just doesn't want to didn't want to save. We're just going to continue like that's it. Basically, my job was to introduce or to talk further about how the community can get involved in designing the tools and infrastructure of the future. The tools and infrastructure that would actually be used to help people discover performances by artists, but also, and this is something that will probably be physically important in the future, and Sarah mentioned it. I think it's important to put in mind that curation and criticism, as well as archiving, will be done in the future by algorithms. We already have algorithms that crawl the web and archive information about various topics and fields. We as humans, it's already with us, but it will become common in the future. We'll have digital assistants whom we will be entrusting to pass value judgments on our behalf, analyze information about shows, from reviews to just the content shared by the creators, and decide whether we would want to see that show or not. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that information representation goes well beyond just being able to structure information about a show on a website so that it becomes listed by Google and recommended by Google. It will be information and the tags are up will be used by algorithms who do natural language processing to do everything from curation to summarization to archiving to perhaps even will have an impact in education. So if we could go to the next slide, I just want to introduce to everybody something that us, myself, Mariel, and Sarah have been working on, which is an initiative called Performing Arts Information Presentation Community Group. This is, as the name suggests, an open forum. What many of you may not know is that W2C, so the World Wide Web Consortium, allows community groups to form groups and do work without any fee. It's open to everybody. And we envision this, this community group as dedicated to advancing the use of shared conceptual models. Some of you might be familiar with the term ontology. If not, just an information representation standard will do for the moment. An important mission of this group will be also to act as an advocate for representational standardization in the performing arts sector across the field, share awareness, spread awareness about the importance of this initiative with artists, but also get big tech companies to listen and adapt tools that will be designed by or in collaboration with artists and for artists, or at least partially for artists. I'm an audience member. That's how I see myself. I got involved because not just Mariel is my friend, but I wanted to get better recommendations for shows. I'm an art lover, so that's my skin in the game. That's why I want to work on this. Not just because I'm passionate about artificial intelligence and spreading the gospel on that. Coming back to the Performing Arts Information Presentation Group, we will work collaboratively, so that's the vision, with any group, company, organization that are also actively working on relevant standards and on implementing related technologies. At least at the beginning, I think the main focus of the group would be on designing, maintaining, and revising vocabularies and foundational specification for the performing arts. If we could go forward. Just a quick word about the W2C. I'm familiar with the W2C from my other work that I've done over the years. They're a wonderful organization. Their mission is to provide logistical infrastructure for groups, such as the Performing Arts Information Presentation Group. And this will allow basically for everybody. It allows for an easy way for innovation from both individuals as well as community groups, and that is extremely important. The way they enable us to do so is by providing logistical infrastructure for the group. So they'll have a mechanism for us to operate, to build consensus, and also, if we so wish, they will provide us with a fast track of the work we're doing towards a worldwide web standard. And that's quite important. This is how we can actually get to influence the big players, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples of this world. Next slide, please. How to get involved? We will send out a proposal. We have drafted the charter for the community group when we would welcome feedback on that charter. We will also email out instructions that will allow everybody interested in to join the group. So if I have 15 minutes left, my whole goal was not to take away from the artists. I'm here just to listen to you and learn from you. So thank you, Mariel.
Thanks, Daniela. So we do have about 15 minutes, as you just said, before we have to wrap up. So what I wanted to take some time to do was actually solicit some questions and open discussion. I have some of my own questions for you, but first, before we did that, I wanted to see if there were it was a lot of content that we just covered, and it was a lot of talking from us. So I want to see if people do have questions, feedback, concerns, anything that you want to address sort of immediately. And the way we'll do that, because it is a big group, if you can raise your hand if you have a question, or the other option is to put it directly into the chat, and then we'll address it there. So I'll give a minute for people to be able to do that. See if you've got questions in the chat happening. Or again, if you want to go on the mic, you can raise your hand. I'll call on you and you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Any brave souls? Okay. Doesn't look like we have any, I don't see any questions at this time happening. It's just one second. Let me see if there's any hands being raised. I know it was a lot of content that we just gave to everybody. You may need a bit of a time to process it.
Actually, a very interesting question as far as I'm concerned as a knowledge engineer in chat. So what is the distinction between performing arts and digital media? I don't have the answer to that. I'm hoping the community can actually come up with an answer, but it seems to me that is an important question. And because this distinction is not captured by the representational standards out there, I think this is a great starting point.
Oh, it helps if I actually find the right place where the chat is happening. Okay, let me see here. There are some questions that have been put into the chat. Thank you, everybody. Give me a second to process this. I'm new to some of these features here. Okay. Okay. Oh, Margaret, I just want to I want to reinforce some of the things that have been said in the chat here. So Margaret mentioned that Creative Users Projects is beginning to tackle some of the arts accessibility perspective, which is really great. And it would be awesome to include or liaise with them as we go about doing this work. So thanks for bringing that to our attention, Margaret. Interesting. Jai brings up a question too around, is it possible to apply genre to arts events? This might be getting into the weeds, but this specific ontology that he brings up allows you to bind any Wikipedia entries to your schema. Did you want to say more on that, Jai?
It's like I said, it's pretty in the weeds, but just that, you know, there are different ways with schema that you can apply genre in a way that's a little bit more expansive than the schema.org definition. So it's just another way. And the funny thing is that, you know, in the performing arts, we're so far behind some of the more, you know, kind of product oriented websites. And so I've been like looking and reading, you know, a lot of the SEO, SEM kind of websites to get some information, because some of the techniques that they use are really sophisticated in ways that we could learn from. So anyway, that's one of the strategies that I learned.
Awesome, thank you. You've included that link here as well, so we can refer to that and take a look at that. Okay. I'm just going through, there's a lot of comments and questions here. I was chatting so much, I didn't have a chance to go through them all. So give me a second here. Okay, well, I don't see any more specific questions related to the chat, the discussion that we've had. I do have a couple of questions specifically just for people here. The question that I have, let me see if I can bring it up on the chat here, is just what needs or concerns do you have as an artist as a researcher, as a organization, in terms of information representation, or even a concern that you've had that either has been addressed or hasn't been addressed here? I'm really interested in the gaps. So you can, again, put it in the chat or just take a moment to think about that. And one thing I think a lot about too is whose information is being what information and whose information is being represented or privileged in terms of these ontologies and vocabularies versus whose is being left out. Where are the gaps? Who are the people that need to be invited into the room to say, you know what, we've never looked at, you know, building an accessibility ontology or a representation, or we've never looked at building one for the Indigenous body of work. So I'm curious if there are people on the call who have or know of needs or concerns around either information that's being represented or whose isn't being represented, or gaps that we're seeing.
Mariel, can I just jump in here? Because there's a lively discourse around digital performance, performing arts, liveness, digital media that I think probably exceeds the context of this discussion today, but is one sort of deeply close to my heart. And also just looking at Catherine Moore. Hi, Catherine. A question about uniqueness versus taxonomic organizations for artists. This actually is sort of at the root of the anecdote that I was referring to earlier, which is when is an actor not a performer, right? When they're ontological. And the kind of I think one of the things that's going to be really important over in the process, or as part of these conversations, is understanding the ways in which the tools create the definitions that create the realities. And that inevitably, once there are constructed definitions, there becomes necessarily an inclusion and an exclusion. And so I think one of the real challenges is that in constructing a taxonomy, is that we start really thinking and attending to those divisions in very expansive and also in really rigorous ways. One of the proposals of the Performance in Media book, which I should say I did not write by myself, I wrote it with good friends and colleagues, Jennifer Parker Starbuck, who's at Royal Holloway University in London, and David Saltz, who's at the University of Georgia. And you know, one of the things that we actually proposed there were different taxonomies and ways of challenging the function of a taxonomic system as it applies to the performing arts. The challenge there, of course, is that that works very well for humans, but it doesn't work well for machines. And so this is really the crux of the challenge that we're taking up, and why I think it's important to get as many people and as many different perspectives and different kinds of work, right, across a kind of, you know, live to you know, digital to mediated continuum into the conversation, recognizing that any choice is necessarily going to create some of these kinds of insides and outsides. And so figuring out how we can create something that's useful without that becoming, you know, de facto reality, right? Understanding there will always be outliers, there will always be exceptions, and there will always be space that kind of works at the margins. And we need to figure out, I think one of the real interesting challenges is how we figure out how to account for and attend to those margins and outliers, even as we build a robust system that can work within the established frameworks that we have, particularly in terms of, you know, digital finding methods and other kinds of online tools.
This is like, I hate being put in a box. Even I think Awais, thanks, hi Awais, mentioned too about just how we're forced, even within the granting bodies, to choose. I always have to choose with Blue Mouth, we have to choose, are we inter-arts? Are we at the Canada Council? Are we theater? We kind of go between the two things because we're interdisciplinary. Like, we don't really fit into these categories, and they're starting to blend those categories, but the same thing gets translated into a vocabulary or a representation online. And I think, Daniela, I don't know if you can speak to this, just about the ways that we can sort of both allow freedom in the way that you build representations.
Yeah,
Well,
I was just about to jump in
yeah,
on this, because
please.
I think there's a misconception related to standardization, in the sense that people feel or think or told that they have to abide by just one specific standard. And there are ways to actually construct your own standard and link back to other people's standards, allowing them. It's in technical terms we call it meaning negotiation, where there's the infrastructure that does allow meaning negotiation, so you can express your particular view about the work that you do. And still, because we communicate as humans, and we communicate because we all use the same shared, very basic building blocks, and we all agree on certain very basic meanings, and then build on those. It's the same in knowledge representation. It doesn't have to be just one taxonomy that rules them all. As long as there are mechanisms to actually coordinate and link this ontologies. I will call them ontologies because they're not just simple taxonomies. The meaning that can be expressed there is a lot more complex. And I noticed in the chat that people were worried about that, were concerned about that. And I want to allay everyone's fears that they don't have to abide by just one standard. However, I think it's important to come together as a group and discuss the meaning of various concepts and build from there.
And I think it's also, I just want to say that you are an incredible resource, Daniela, because you work with domain experts who don't necessarily need to understand the minute intricacies or the very specific technological needs of building these representations. You work with domain experts and then translate that into representations that can be used, right?
Exactly. I let you do the magic, the art's magic. I'll do the technical magic.
And what's been interesting with working with you is that I'm like, well, you know what to do. And you're like, no, you have to, like, as an artist, it can't come from a technology. It has to come from us, the artists, in order to define what these things are, because otherwise we're letting other people define it, and we're going to see the same sort of challenges that we've.
It's very important that the artists instruct the technology people on how they want their work to be represented, not the other way around.
Yeah. And so I guess we're just about at time. We're at 3 minutes. Are there any final questions? This is a good question from Oasis. What about audiences? How do they get to define the work? This is a great question. I haven't thought so much.
I'm an audience member, so same thing applies to me. I can actually define an ontology or a representation that describes what I want, what I'm interested in, and build. I actually have the technical knowledge to build an algorithm that will go out in the world and search the web to grab for me what I want. I don't have to actually rely on Google. I could let Google know about my own information representation, and ask them to incorporate that into their recommended tools. So in the future, it's not quite here yet, but in the future it will be possible.
I definitely think too that as artists, we need to be thinking more, like a lot of the existing standards are really from like an archival perspective. They've been done by either Google, who wants the events listed, or a library who's trying to archive it. And so there's these missing concepts of like the audience journey, like artists who are, when we create work, there's this level of our audience's journey from, sort of you're watching in your seat, which is a level of engagement, versus you're getting up and you're participating in the show. And there's these stages. I've read about them a few. They're quite defined, of different levels of engagement. And of course, as an audience member, this is something I'm interested in. As an artist, I'm interested in conveying that to an audience. So I think what you're saying to Oasis is that a part of this work really needs to be about artists making this work, and also going out and getting perspectives and thoughts from audiences themselves. Like, where's the gap between how we're getting our work and what they're trying to understand about it. So
we're just we're almost out of time, but there's one more point I wanted to make. Sarah actually made the point in her talk. Archiving is changing, and also the impact that it has on the present and the future is changing as well. I think this is very important to recognize, analyze, and act upon. And that would be all for me.
I'm just reading this beautiful note too from Catherine Moore about to audiences, if everything new is not like anything else, it's very disorienting and very hard to write effective promotional materials.
Yeah.
True. One thing to teach is the skill to balance writing to include vocabulary that is both familiar and unfamiliar. Now, it's interesting though, because then we're getting into marketing. So again, for human consumption. But what's interesting is if you make that marketing material, how do you encode it for a computer so that it's not for a human to read, but that a computer or a machine can understand the same concept?
I have one more comment on this. This is research that is happening right now. This is actually meant for people whose English proficiency is, let's say, less than ideal. There are machine learning tools being developed right now who would actually rewrite or translate English text into English, but in a different way. So people, it's great to consider a mix of words, and that will work, but you will not have you may not have full control over what audiences see from the material that or how audiences are seeing, or what audiences are being presented with in terms of the content that you're producing and publishing on the web. Something to keep in mind.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to end this discussion. Again, this is meant to be the beginning point. I know we did do a lot of talking. So the community group that we've proposed, we'll send out those documents for comment and for feedback. Please do give us your thoughts and feedback on it. And we'll send out joining information. It will be, Sarah Bay-Cheng has agreed to chair the PAIR, our acronym for it, the Performing Arts Information Community Group with the W3C, which will be forming at the end of this month and then starting in September. So we'll send out all of the details about that. So please we'll stay connected, and we'd love to have everyone here and get involved. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks everybody, and have a great Friday and have an awesome weekend. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Thank you, Mariel. Well done.
Oh, and thank you to Sarah and to Daniela for giving so freely of their time. They're just such amazing resources and amazing people to have on board this project. It's awesome.
I'm honored to be included. Bye-bye.